About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Good afternoon, it's Jim here at Tutor to You. Welcome to our latest GCSE Sociology live stream, and I'm joined today by Vicky in the middle and Sarah on the right.
Hi.
Two familiar faces. Good to see you, and of course you've done many of these GCSE Sociology live streams before, but today's, it looks like another cracker, which is another one in our series on crime and deviance. Just before I pass over to Vicky to get a content-filled, activity-filled session underway, a bit of admin. I can see on the screen here that lots of people are joining us live, which is fantastic. You get a chance, if you wish, to type your suggested answers into the live chat window so that Sarah and Vicky can see how you're getting on. Please do, don't be shy. You don't have to. If you're watching on catch up and replay, which we know from the YouTube statistics is hundreds, in fact, from last week, almost 1,000 students catching up with the session, then you don't get the chance to use the live chat, but you do get a chance, if you wish, perhaps you're watching at school or in a class, to pause the video, have a think about the activity, maybe jot your answers down, and then start again and see how you got on. So you give yourself a bit more time. There are 5 or 6 activities in today's session, but also we've got some useful sort of content summaries, key topic summaries that we'll show you during the session. Don't worry about writing it all down, because you can go to tutor2u.net/live. As soon as the session is finished, the PowerPoint slides as well as a session replay will be available to download. So you'll be able to copy those into your notes or print them off or do whatever you want to do with all those really useful exam technique and content summaries that we go through. So please don't feel the need to write everything down as you're going. I think, Vicky, we're good to go. So what's tonight's session all about?
So we are looking at social control this evening. So we are sort of focusing on 2 or 3 main parts of that. So we're going to think about the perspectives of social control. We're going to think about the difference between informal and formal social control. And then we're going to also have a look at a couple of key studies which are based on social control, particularly from the feminist perspective this week.
Fantastic. Right. Okay. Have fun, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you. So we're going to start this week's session by looking at some altered vowels. These are all key terms related to social control, but they've had their vowels altered. So can you work out what they are? Can you pop your answers in the chat window? So each time we'll give you 10, maybe 20 seconds to have a look. You can pop what you think they are. They are all to do with social control, and hopefully they are terms that you are familiar with. So our first one is currently up on the screen. I'll give you a couple of moments to pop it into the chat window, and then we'll have a look at what you've got. Again, obviously, if these are going too quickly and you're watching on playback, you can pause and give yourself a little bit more time. Excellent. So we've got some good answers coming through now. Can we have the answer on the screen, please, Jim? Perfect. So we have rewards as our first one. A really good motivator to work hard and behave. For example, things like extra pocket money, maybe incentives at school or work. Early release from prison is a good reward, sort of an incentive. If we're talking about formal control. Next one up, please, Jim. Okay, so Xingxians. I possibly haven't pronounced that correct, but then it doesn't make sense. So I don't suppose it matters how it's pronounced on the screen. So let's have a think. What do you think this one is? It is linked to the one that we have just looked at. So if you can pop your guess into the chat window, we'll give you another couple of moments. It's a term that you should be familiar with from this unit of work so far. Okay, well done. There's a couple of right answers coming to that chat window. It is sanctions. So something put in place to either reward good behaviour or punish poor behaviour. Can we have the next one up on the screen, please, Jim? Excellent. So social nams. So what do we think this one is? So again, all linked to social control. Couple of moments. Pop what you think is in the chat window. Okay, we've got a couple of answers coming through already. Both correct answers. Well done. Jim, can we have the correct answer on the screen, please? So social norms. So most people, we hopefully know what these are. Most people share the same beliefs as to what is right or wrong in society. And generally these will keep people conforming, keeping them from not taking part in criminal or deviant behaviour. Okay, we have 2 more to go. So our next one is... par pressure. And it pretty much sounds like I have just pronounced there, but with an atrocious accent. So this can be good or bad. What do we think it might be? Okay. Just a couple of minutes to get this into the chat window. So not a couple of minutes, a couple of moments. Okay, we have the correct answer coming through. Well done. So can we have that on the screen? It is peer pressure. Okay, again, it could be good or bad. So you might be pressurised into criminal behaviour, such as shoplifting perhaps, but also it could be good in terms of friends telling you to behave and not act out. Our last one then, please, Jim. Okay, so we have got the praisen system. This one I think is pretty easy. To be honest, they've all been a little bit easy so far. So we're just kind of easing you into the session gently. So what do we think this one is? Just give you a moment to get your guesses into the chat window. Excellent. Can we have that on the screen, please, Jim? It is a prison system. Formal social control when other forms of social control haven't worked. Okay, I've got Ben in the chat window asking what's his reward for getting a correct answer. Well, the knowledge, Ben, that you've done it, that you know your sociology. Well done. Right, can we have the next slide up, please? So today's session is going to cover 3 things. We're going to have a look at formal and informal methods of social control. We're going to think about sociological perspectives on social control, and we're going to think about the feminist perspective on female conformity. tied to patriarchy there. So I am going to hand over to Sarah to think about what we mean by social control.
Thanks, Vicky. That was a brilliant warm-up. I love those keywords. So we're going to look at social control, and then we're going to differentiate between the different types of social control. But first of all, we need to understand what this term really means in order to write confidently about it. So social control is a key issue in society, and all groups, all of our different sociological perspectives, they're all interested in how society keeps social order, but obviously they've got conflicting views on how that's done and whether it's positive or negative. So we have to remember as well that social order rarely collapses. It's in very rare exceptional circumstances like war, revolution. Generally what we see is society ticking along quite well. And part of the reason for that is because most of daily life is managed through these informal social control systems that we have. And that can include kind of social norms, kind of unwritten rules of behavior, and the way that these control how we behave and how we keep each other in check, and how there are rewards and punishments and sanctions, through society. So we can have the next slide, please. So when we're thinking about this informal social control, which we've said, is one of our kind of main ways that society is kept running smoothly, we've got different aspects of society that kind of carry this out. So within the family, we see these informal social controls, like the family or parents using sanctions, anything, from a young age, the naughty step, being grounded as you're, in your teenage years, maybe losing access to your iPad or your mobile phone. But then also the reward side of that, like getting extra pocket money or being rewarded maybe with extra screen time. So the family create that informal social control, and we keep each other in check in that way. In similar ways, school creates this as well. If you're familiar with the concept of the hidden curriculum, that really, aside from what we learn formally at school, the hidden curriculum keeps us in check in terms of behavior. It promotes expectations of hard work, so it kind of nudges us in the right direction. It promotes honesty and kind of good values. It promotes following of the rules. Positive and negative behavior points in schools, whether it's house points, merit points, behavior points, all of those are used to keep everybody on the right track and to send those signals through that informal social control. I'm sure many of you are familiar with detentions, but also positions of responsibility like form reps, form captains, school council representatives, and that kind of thing, so that schools are allowing people to, we're using that informal social control to allow people to prepare for future society as well. And we've also got peer groups. So peer pressure is another form of informal social control. It might be positive, it might be negative, but we are seeing, what we're seeing there in society is that peer groups are nudging each other, keeping each other in check, maybe ostracizing people who don't meet the kind of values, the norms and values that they're expecting to see within the peer group, and also, giving people kind of positive publicity and positive attention when they're doing the right thing. So all of those aspects, those different institutions of society help create that informal social control. And we've also got communities as another aspect of that informal social control. So we've got close-knit communities, things like the threat of gossip, the threat of someone telling your parents, the threat of being found out is often enough to actually stop that deviant behaviour, which might otherwise happen if we haven't got those communities, making it kind of obvious that that's what's going to happen, that's what the effects will be. And this then sometimes can be more effective in villages and small towns because the close-knit communities know each other, they know who everyone is, there's going to be repercussions, there's no kind of anonymity that you might have with bigger urban areas. And that's why with the bigger urban areas where people aren't all known to each other, where you're not known by all of your neighbours, then they start to rely on things more like surveillance measures like CCTV. The police become more, formal types of social control tend to creep in there because those informal types don't work as well. So there's a really nice evaluation there, thinking about where informal social control is more or less effective within communities. And we've also got religion. So religion acts as informal social control. It plays a really big role because of the teachings of religion, teaching the followers of each religion what is right and what is wrong. So achieving that value consensus. Now, Marxists believe that religion is simply a force of social control to control the working class, to get them to be passive and docile and to work hard and to kind of go along with the expectation of them instead of questioning it or fighting back. And often that's because of promises of rewards in the afterlife. And then functionalists, of course, don't see it as quite so cynical as Marxists. Functionalists see this as a great thing because religion actually binds people together. It binds society together. It creates this glue that you might refer to in your essays as social cohesion. And then, of course, we've got the media. So the media constantly sending us messages about how we should behave. That might be because they're reporting on crimes directly, sending us messages and, you know, putting those judgments out there about what is the right way to live, what is the wrong way to live, and what the repercussions are if you don't follow the path that's expected of you within society. But we've also got public information adverts, ways to behave. You know, you'll see them around the train station. You know, be careful of going near the tracks. Don't abuse the staff if you've been drinking and that kind of thing. And then adverts about drink driving, use mobile phones while you're driving. So lots of these kind of public health, public information messages to act as more informal social control and keep us within our value consensus. And of course, we've got the new media. Social media really reinforces this, naming and shaming criminals. You know, we see that within community groups on social media, as well as in the wider sort of larger group. So things can go viral very easily, and that therefore adds to the level of informal social control that we've got in society. So that's a nice topic overview of informal social control, and Vicky is going to talk to us about formal social control.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So sometimes informal control isn't quite enough and the authorities might need to step in to add a bit of formal control to the situation. And this means that official institutions are being used to help keep society in order. And there are lots and lots of different examples of this. I'm going to give you just one example. I mean, you've got like children's services, education, mental health, and all sorts there. But the education teams, for example, will get involved if children are failing to attend school. Hopefully it's none of you involved there. Parents can be fined, they can be taken to court. The education teams are also part of that permanent exclusion process as well. So that's part of full social control. Obviously, we've got the police, courts and the prison system. This is the ultimate form of social control. And they are there to punish those who break the law and to protect the rest of society from us. And lots of people will believe that they do a really good job in keeping society safe. Other people might, disagree with that slightly. And obviously, certainly the perspectives of sociology, so Marxists and functionalists and feminists all have a slightly different view on that as well. So we're going to have a quick activity to have a look at some of the things that we talked about here. So we've got a categorised activity. We've got 8 different sanctions that we would use to try and keep social order, social control. Some of them are formal, some of them are informal. You've got 60 seconds to separate them, those key phrases into those 2 categories. And if you're watching live, we just need to have you popping those into the chat window. So formal and then the numbers, informal and then the numbers that go with that. So Jim, if we can have the minute timer, please. We have gossiping, we've got a monetary fine, we have curfew, we have peer pressure, drums, exclusion, a custodial sentence, grounding, and community service. So which ones do you think go in which category? Okay, you have 50 seconds of the timer, get those into the window. Excellent. We've got some good answers coming through here. Well done. Okay, some good answers coming through that chat window. Jim, can we have the correct answers up on the screen, please? So we have formal social control. We've got that monetary fine, for example, a speeding fine. Sometimes you might be ordered to pay for damage by the courts. Permanent exclusion, sometimes it's linked to crimes such as bringing drugs into school or a violent assault. We've got a custodial sentence. Hopefully we all know that that means imprisonment. And we have community service. For example, you might be asked to serve 200 hours, normally for less serious crimes, perhaps non-violent. This is also known as community payback. And in our informal social control, we have curfew. Now, this is an interesting one because when I was making this activity, I was thinking about a curfew that parents might put into place for you to come home a little bit early. However, this could go into the other category, into our formal social control, because sometimes offenders are given a curfew after they have been released from prison. This sometimes works with tagging, so they are not allowed in certain areas at certain times. So that's obviously a formal version of the curfew. We have peer pressure. So we mentioned that earlier in the very first activity, which can be positive. So for example, perhaps your friend's trying to get you to behave in a lesson. That would be a good form of social control. We have grounding, like losing the rights to go out and socialise with your friends. And then we've got gossiping that Sarah's already mentioned. It's a form of social control which quite often is used against women, in particular, not just women, but it tends to be quite effective. So people fear being gossiped about, particularly if they're displaying something like unladylike behaviour. So therefore, that makes people conform a little bit more, and that's going to be talked about a bit more later in this session. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, and she's going to talk to you about the different perspectives on social control.
Thanks, Vicky. So we're going to do an overview of these really important different perspectives on social control. And then we're going to do a nice little activity to test your knowledge on these. So we've got our functionalist perspective. They've got this really positive view of social control within society. They see it as necessary and really important. They see it as keeping society in order. So we've got Durkheim's idea of collective sentiment and everyone kind of sharing these values and keeping society in check. But then our Marxists come in with this conflict perspective, and they're far more critical of the criminal justice system. So they see social control as keeping society in order, but they see this as oppressive. So they see it as happening in the interest of the ruling class. They see laws being used to control the workers, but possibly not controlling or even benefiting the ruling class. And they see this selective law enforcement where there's different enforcement of law in order to control the working classes and, keep the privileged in their privileged positions. And feminists coming in with an equally conflict perspective, only their focus rather than capitalism is the patriarchy and the oppression of women. So the idea that social control particularly could focus on gossiping about women, and particularly trying to control people who step outside of that version of what a good woman is and how women should behave, and this, to use a fancy sociological term, hegemonic femininity, the idea that there's one version of how women should behave, and therefore benefiting men. So social control, even through crime and deviance, can still be seen to benefit patriarchal society. So you've got your overview there, one consensus perspective in your functionalist, and then the conflict perspectives of Marxists and feminists. And we are going to have a nice opportunity now to test your knowledge on this by doing a quick true or false. So you can put T or F in the chat here. Or you can add any extra justification if you'd like to. The first one is that functionalists see social control as necessary. Is that true or is that false? What do we think? What do we think are consensus functionalists? And yes, that one is true. Well done. Wasn't straight in there with the right answer. That one is absolutely true. Functionalists do see social control as really important and necessary to society. So what have we got next? Marxists see social control as keeping society in order in a good way. So Marxists love a bit of social control. True or false? Give you a moment to have a think about that. This might be a point if you're watching on replay where you press pause. Do Marxists think that it's great that we keep society in order with social control? Well done. A couple of brilliant answers coming in there. Absolutely, this is false, because Marxists do see it as keeping society in order, but that bit after the comma, in a good way, not true. Marxists see this as oppressive. They see this as a negative thing. And what have we got up next? Feminists see informal social control as keeping women under control. Is that true? Is that really what feminists think? True or false? Give you a moment to have a think about that. Fantastic. Got some answers coming through there. Well done, those of you that are taking part. And of course, everyone who commented there was right. It's true. And feminists do see it as keeping women under control. And remember, they see that from that conflict negative perspective. And we've got one more true or false to have a look at. Functionalists believe that there is a differential enforcement of the law. So do functionalists believe that the law is sometimes applied selectively? Is that true or is that false? I'll give you a minute to have a think about that. Okay, brilliant. And the answer there is that is false, because actually that's the perspective of Marxists and not functionalists. So functionalists think it's all very fair and it represents the views of the masses. But of course, Marxists see this selective law enforcement as unfair. Well done there, especially those of you who took part. I'm going to hand back over to Vicky to talk about female conformity.
Brilliant. That was an excellent overview of those perspectives. So we're going to have a look then at female conformity, talking about the work of Frances Hindinson. So hopefully this is a study that you are familiar with. So she talks about women living in a male-controlled world where they have to conform to society's expectations and norms of what it's like to be a woman. And it's patriarchy and social control that gives women less opportunity to commit crime. And there are lots of reasons for this. So firstly, she talks about girls being given less freedom than boys. So parents perhaps feel a bit more protective towards girls. They might give them an earlier curfew. That's a word we've come across earlier in this session. And husbands and partners may want to know how and when their other half is getting home after a night out. They're taking over that protective role from parents. Linked to this is a fear of sexual violence. This is particularly in the news over the last couple of weeks, which frightens women into staying at home more often. So the recent and tragic, shocking Sarah Everhard case is a really, really good example of this. We also have women being feared, being gossiped about. We've talked about this several times now, if they behave in that deviant way. At work, women are more closely supervised, as they are less likely to have those top positions. So there's less chance of them getting or committing that white-collar crime, such as fraud. And then finally, those domestic and childcare duties mean that women might actually have less time to commit crimes. So then if we have a look at the work of Pat Carlin, she said that women are less likely to commit crime. But when they do commit crime, it is more likely to be working class women that do this, and that women are led to conform through two deals. She wrote a piece of work called Crimes of the Powerless, where she interviewed women who were serving prison sentences. She believed that these two deals were the class deal, where if women go out to work, they'll earn enough money to have a decent standard of living, and the gender deal, where if you conform to that typical domestic role of wife and mother, you'll be rewarded with material and emotional stability. She found out, though, when she was interviewing these prisoners, that when women fail to achieve these deals, that might make them turn to crime. So many of those women she interviewed had failed to get a steady job, and they struggled with poverty, and some had experienced troubled upbringing such as time in care or abuse. So actually the family wasn't really that important to them. And because of this, these women had failed to get these two deals that she believed made most women conform and not commit crime. They felt they'd got nothing to lose if they turn to crime. This links quite nicely to Travis Hershey's control theory, which you might have come across before, which I'm going to hand over to Sarah to explain to you.
Thanks, Vicky. So Hershey's social control theory is really helpful because it gives us a real it depends on. So it's telling us that social control is really dependent on these bonds in society. So Hershey picked these 4 things and from the research and said, well, whether these are in place or not depends, will then impact whether people actually stay with the social control or whether these things aren't in place, and then therefore people may be more willing to indulge or more led to indulge in deviant behavior. So those 4 things are, firstly, our connection to other people, and you can see how that links to things we've talked about already today in terms of peer pressure and in terms of that informal social control. But another aspect that Hershey looked at is how much we have to lose. So how much risk do we have? Do we have a high position in society? Do we have a job where we would lose our career and we'd lose our status if we were found to be involved in any level of deviance? And then also, how involved are we in society? How engaged are we with society? How busy are we with society? So that can really impact the rational decisions that we make in terms of whether we commit the crime or not, or whether we get involved in something deviant. And then finally, how committed we actually are to society's values. So we might be aware of those values, but are we committed to those values? Do we really have that moral integrity of believing in them? So if all of these bonds, according to Hershey, if all of these bonds are strong enough, then people will have the discipline, the self-discipline, the restraint. They won't be inclined to indulge in that criminal behavior, that deviant behavior. However, if some of these things start to fall apart or these things aren't in place in society, then people are more likely to give into that temptation or to be pulled in that direction. So that leads us nicely on to a recap of these different theories on crime that we've looked at. And the challenge here is to work out the 4 groups of phrases that we've got here. So we're looking for 4 groups that we can link together within the 12 boxes that we've got there. So I'll give you a moment to have a look. Some excellent interaction in the chat, some brilliant comments, brilliant engagement. So having a look here and think about the aspects we've just looked at. So we looked at Heiderson, we looked at Hershey. How might they be linked together by aspects mentioned in these boxes? Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to possibly jot down your responses there. And if you're watching this on replay, you might want to pause this and have a look back through your notes and use this as a real consolidation. So if we can see the first group, so we've got Heidenson and female conformity. So when Vicky took us through that, we talked about these aspects, girls having more likely to have curfews, get women more likely to be gossiped about, as Vicky told us, women fearing sexual violence, very topical at the moment, and women more likely to be closely supervised in the workplace. So Heidenson gives us this, these wonderful aspects that we can link together. And then next, and this gets easier as you see the different groups being taken away. So we've got Carlin's idea of class and gender. So we've got the gender deal, the class deal, so the deal that we make within society. And we've got the material and emotional rewards of family life. And we've got this idea that if you work, you will get a decent standard of living. So if that deal is kept to, then people are less likely to commit crime. And that leaves us with 4 more boxes. And you may have guessed that these are all related to Hershey's theory of social control. And we've got those 4 aspects that we looked at: connection to others, how involved or busy are we within society, how much do we have to lose, so the risk factor, and how committed are we to society's values. So well done there. It's really important to draw those connections between different theories so that you're able to draw those connections when you're developing your answers in the exam. And speaking of exams and assessments, we are going to have a look at a couple of the types of questions that you could be faced with in your GCSE assessments. So the first question here that we're looking at is a 4-marker, and it's asking you to identify and explain one reason why women are less likely to commit crimes than men. So I'll give you a moment to have a think about which answer would you use here? Which point would you bring in and then develop in order to answer that question? So what would you identify and then explain? And we've got some suggested answers here. So hopefully you thought of one or two. You could use social control by parents, husbands and partners, and the way that, you know, women are less likely to commit crimes because they have more control over them within society. You may have used the fear of violence. And you may have used the idea of domestic commitments. You know, women are too busy doing their unfair share of the domestic load to have time to commit crime. The thing to remember, and the absolute gold, the exam gold for these questions, is don't give more than 1 point. One is it's saying identify and explain one reason. You do not get any marks from the examiner if you give 2 or 3 reasons. Where those marks come from is from developing one of those points. So it's really important to make your decision, pick the point, and then focus on gaining the rest of the marks through the development. And if we could see the next slide, please. We've got an overview of this here. The examiner wants to see one reason develop fully. If you put more than one reason, you don't get credit, but you also lose time that you should be spending developing that response. So, for example, the examiner wants to see if you choose your aspects of social control, they want to see you understand what social control is. So if you focus on lack of freedom or you focus on fear of violence, and then you develop that, within the capacity of that 4-mark answer, and you can bring in theory. So you could bring in Heiderson and you could link that to the theory, and then you're showing that you can apply this to real life sociology as well. And it's back over to Vicky for a bit of a give me 3.
Excellent. This is our last quick activity, just summarising some of the things that we have talked about today. So I would like you to give me 3 forms of informal social control. You've got 30 seconds on the clock. If you can pop those into the chat window. Obviously, if you're watching on playback, you can give yourself a little bit of extra time if you need to. This should be easy, though, because we've covered these earlier in the session. So 3 forms of social control. Off you go. Okay, well done. So 3 forms of informal social control. On the screen we've got peer pressure, such as your friends persuading you to behave in the correct way or stop you getting in trouble. Obviously, they can do the complete opposite. And naming and shaming through social media, linked to gossiping, and that religion teaching followers what is right or wrong. There are lots of others that we've covered in today's session, but they are just 3 there. And our last question is going to be, give me 3 forms of formal social control. So again, 30 seconds on the clock. Off you go. Excellent. And again, we've got some good answers coming through that chat window. So 3 forms of social control. Remember, there are lots of them. So we've got monetary fines, that community service or community payback, and custodial sentences. But there are lots of others that you could have had here. Well done. We've had some good answers in the chat window. So, Jim, can you just pop on the last slide for us, please? So, hopefully this session has been really useful for you and helped you understand social control a little bit more. We've gone through some theory. We've given you some examples. We've looked at those the difference between informal and formal social control, which is something that in the past my students have always struggled a little bit with. If you need a little bit more help, there are lots of different resources and study notes and revision support on the Tutor2U website. So you either follow the QR code or you can go onto tutor2u.net and follow the homepage to sociology, and you'll find huge amounts of resources there. Well done, everybody, for taking part tonight. And those of you that are watching at home, well done as well.
That is a fantastic session, absolutely packed with activities, but also those really useful summaries on, for example, formal, informal social control, those key studies, key perspectives. Fantastic revision session. And don't forget, you can watch the whole thing again and again and again, if you wish, by going to tutor2u.net/live and just pick the GCSE Sociology from the drop-down. There are lots of other subjects in there. For example, as we speak at the minute, GCSE History is just finishing off their session, business, geography and more. So please do that and download the slides. And if you enjoyed the session, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube to help YouTube recommend this session to other GCSE sociology students. What a fantastic session. So a huge thanks, as always, to Vicky and Sarah for guiding us through it. If you've enjoyed it, this is a regular slot, Mondays, 5:30 for GCSE Sociology revision. So hopefully you'll join us again this time next week. But for now, we'll see you later.
Well done,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye, well done.